Okay, this week's video reaction is about why they do it, and it's about white collar crime. And Eugene Soltz was the speaker. They said that he attended, I think it was the University of Chicago, said that he got his PhD in accounting. And basically, what he started out saying was he was up all night, every night, around 3 a.m. He found himself not sleeping. So he started cruising through the channels and he found MSNBC Lockup. And he thought it was fascinating to hear about the white collar crime. He took it upon himself to look up the addresses of different people who were indicted of white collar crime. He did some name drops. I didn't recognize any of them. I'm not real familiar with the business world. So he did mention a few people who had been convicted of white collar crime. He said he thought of 10 questions that he wanted to ask. He wrote them letters and then he just waited. And he gave them his university address, and within a couple weeks he started getting reactions. He got letters back, people saying that they would take the time to talk to him, and he could even come and visit them if he wanted to start doing like an interview process to find out why did they do it. Discuss the fact that they both were discussing victim perspective versus perpetrator perspective, and the fact that when it comes to the victim, when it came to white collar crime, it was hard to say, oh, there's a victim and I feel bad for what I did. There really was no empathy involved because it wasn't a face-to-face interaction that occurred. Like, as far as the he talked a lot about the insider training, and he said that the victims of those, like, you might take their entire retirement account, which clearly has made a huge effect on that person. But as the perpetrator, you don't actually have that connection to that person. You feel like, okay, I didn't put my hands on them. I didn't physically hurt them. So it was kind of the way that he explained it. It was like they weren't really sure how to react for what they had done wrong. They didn't really see it as being moral or immoral. It was just something that they did. And he also mentioned that, starting out, you never think of yourself as committing these crimes, but 20, 30 years later, you might find yourself in a situation where you are committing a white collar crime, and you may or may not even realize it at the time. He talked about, when he talked about insider training and the harm being different, he also mentioned that it is easier to prosecute when it came to the white collar crime. They literally would set it up and say, okay, well, we know that they're going to commit this act. Go ahead and let them commit it because nobody's going to die during the process. So let them commit it. That way we have the proof necessary to prosecute them and find them guilty of it. He mentioned Steve Garfinkel. He said he was the CEO of medical equipment and that he routinely signed false contracts and didn't really think anything of it. Didn't really say, that it was a big deal about lying because it was only on paper, and that it would definitely be different lying to someone's face. Talked about proximity, being cordial, not going to take someone's wallet, but yet they've taken large amounts of money from them. It's different when it's not on your person. He made that statement in reference to, like, whenever he went to visit them, he was okay with standing there or sitting there visiting with them with his wallet in his pocket. He didn't feel threatened in any way. He didn't think that they were going to steal his wallet, because that's like taking the money off of his person is completely different than wiping out someone's account with the insider trading. So that was really interesting to me because, every day in the business world, different things happen. People may or may not know exactly what they're signing or what they're agreeing to. And there's always that fine line. Or, in my current position, we recently found out that our administrator, which is my supervisor, has decided to leave the company. And how did I find out? I found out by reading it in a newsletter, just like everyone else. So as an employee, I felt slighted. I felt a certain kind of way because I was like, okay, they didn't take the time to pull me in the office and say, this is happening. I just thought I'd give you a heads up and let you know. I read about it just like everyone else. Maybe they thought that that was the best way to go about it. I do look at it as being unprofessional, not letting me know personally, face to face, as my employer, that this change is occurring. But maybe that person doesn't think anything of it. I could definitely relate in that way. As he was talking, I was thinking about that because that just happened to me 2 days ago. They talked about the fine line. He talked about the fine line between personal and being offensive. Talked about intellectual, not being able to identify the victims, being abstract. No one relates to it. Talked about when it comes to the insider training, it's hard to have empathy just because, again, they're not seeing it. They're not seeing the effects of their actions. So it's harder for them to feel empathy towards the victims. They don't really go back and think about whether it was right or wrong. And even whenever they knew that it was wrong, they still did it. Ultimately, you have to make sure that in order to not find yourself in a situation like that, he was talking about, he was asked for some advice. And he said, the advice that he would give is that in general, we don't have a lot of humility. We feel more confident about things as it goes over time. He made the statement, like, if you were a freshman in college compared to being a junior in college, you have less humility because coming in as a freshman, you don't know as much. Going in as a junior, I'm going to push that even forward and say, okay, as a senior, getting ready to graduate college, you feel less humility because you've gone through those 4 years of college. So you've definitely learned a lot and you feel more educated because you're ready to go out and take on the world per se. With your degree in your major that you've worked so hard to get. So it is hard to say, I'm not real sure if I am doing this right or wrong because you feel really confident about it from your education. And so because of him saying that you don't have a lot of humility and you feel more confident, people don't really design plans to help with their weaknesses because we all are still going to have weaknesses, but they don't take the time to design a plan to help them for that. And he talked about an individual who actually decided to have an organizational design, took his weaknesses, anticipated ahead of time that they existed, and figured out ways to do checks and balances to, quote, stay out of trouble. I'm not going to remember the name, but he was talking about an individual who was saying, okay, my weaknesses would be, I'm just going to sign off on this. And instead of going to the lawyers that he dealt with on a regular basis, people that were within his community or network, I guess would be a better word, instead of going to his network and saying, should I sign off on this? Would this be a good idea? Are we going to benefit from this? What do you think? Is it the right thing to do? He actually reached out to someone who had like no connection to that area. The way I understood it, the way he explained it, was they weren't going to benefit from what he was asking them. So it was like they didn't have any, quote, skin in the game. So they were able to be more honest with him, and they explained, okay, I've looked at this 6 different ways, and it's still showing that you should not go in on this. You should not sign off on this. So he came back. He told the attorneys and everyone that was involved within the network that he was not going to sign off on it. And then he said 2 years later, everybody that had agreed with all of that ended up in trouble with the insider trading. So that was very smart for that man to say, okay, I'm going to do this organizational design because look what happened. It kept him out of trouble. So I definitely could see that as a huge benefit. That's a major takeaway for me, to remember that when it comes to my career and different things that I'm trying to figure out, because I have a lot of things right now that I'm trying to figure out as far as my employment and moving forward, I'm not asking people within my network what they think I should do, because I know what they're going to say. You know, of course you should say, of course you should be here. Everything's going to be fine. It'll all work out. I want to know from a person from the outside who has no skin in the game, has no effect on what the outcome would be, just so that I can get that that answer that from that person who I know could be 1,000% honest with me. I like that he interviewed the people that were convicted of the white collar crime. He gave them cases to read, asked for their reactions, and then was able to take that to figure out where they are coming from as far as, you know, the actual people who did the white collar crimes, to understand more and to be able to look at it as the knowing ultimately, whenever you look at insider trading, you are stealing information. So there is a crime committed. So that is my takeaway on that video.